Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the insightful debriefing webinar, where we'll be looking at harnessing tools for actionable insights using core, briefing, and debriefing.
Hi, my name's Tom. I'm one of the education consultants for Laerdal.
My name is Darren Evans, and I'm also one of the education consultants here at Laerdal. And I'd also like to thank Emily Cutts and Emma Sylvester from our marketing team, who are looking after our running of this webinar just behind the scenes.
So moving on to a little bit of housekeeping, we're trying to make this as kind of open to you guys as possible. We've got some question policies we just want to quickly chat through. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout this. Well, we're monitoring the chat on the desk here as well, but also they'll be signaled and directed to us by the team behind the scenes. There's an opportunity throughout this to discuss things. As they come up on the slides, you'll be able to see those, and we'll then unmute you so you can have a conversation with us. Please feel free to engage with us. We're trying to make it as much of a discussion as possible.
So the agenda for today's webinar is as follows. What we'll do first is we'll start by looking at a simulation that takes place with an improvised briefing. Now, what we found is in our own travels, and as we've spoken to you both at universities and hospitals, is that quite a lot of people are in this particular category. And so some of this might resonate with you. And so we'll start with improvised briefing first, and then we'll look at what a brief looks like when we follow the core model, the core briefing model. And that'll be the first model that we look at. After that, we'll then look at what that simulation looks like, and hopefully we'll see a difference between that and the first one. And then we will have an introduction to core debriefing and see some of the benefits that we get from that. And that will be the second tool that we look at in this webinar. So we're going to begin with our improvised briefing. Okay, so this will just be a short video that we start with. And as I said, what I want you to do is I want you to have a think about what you currently do, and think about what your current challenges are, and see if any of this resonates with you.
You might recognise the characters within it, and obviously we're playing roles within that.
Right, if you want to come in then. Yeah, come in. Come on, we haven't got all day. Right, we are fine, just leave it, we're here to do a simulation today, okay? You are aware of everything that's going on, which is good. So we don't really need to cover much because you've done simulation before, is that right? Awesome, mega, that's great. Right, so hopefully you've done some pre-reading so you know what's expected of you today. So what you're going to do is you're going to get me some obs from the simulator and put it together. What is it you do again?
I'm a parent.
Okay, yeah, doesn't really fit. Right, what I need you to be is a consultant for this. So you're a consultant that's come in to an A&E department, and you need to do some obs on the simulator and then deal with them as required. Understood?
Okay.
Yep. Awesome, right, when you're ready. You've done this before. You click the red button. don't need to put that on.
Where's the SATs probe?
Can you see it?
No.
It is there. When you've done simulations previously and you put the SAT probe on, you know the SAT probe's on. It's not that one.
Oh.
So if you remember from last time that you were here, then what you do is you use the SAT probe that's connected to the screen, because that will be the one that gives you the figure that you need.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
That's all tangled up. 2 seconds. That's stuck.
So obviously your patient's waiting for you this whole time. You haven't actually introduced yourself or anything like that.
Oh, I didn't know you could talk.
Yeah, you've done simulation before.
Yeah. Well, I haven't really seen this.
Okay. All simulators are the same. Okay, you've used one, you've used this one. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. So you see now that you've got your SAT probe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? You saturating there?
Yeah.
Okay. What are you going to do now?
I was going to do BP, but you said not to use it.
No, you don't use that. Remember, you don't use that for this. So what do you use?
Is it not?
There you go. See, you know it.
Is this on? SAT.
You remember this screen, don't you?
Stop.
Yeah? As a consultant, you'd know this stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the NIDP button there, the big green one. What does NIDP stand for?
Not always sort of show, but
So,
obviously
you
it's
know it.
different from what I've been used to.
Okay.
So we're not using that. But is there anything else?
No, it's a simulation lab. We've got lots of stuff in here that you don't need to use.
Okay.
You've done simulation before, you said, so you know how the place works.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So I've got my odds and most of them.
Okay.
See,
So what are you going to do now?
he's not breathing or anything. Is he supposed to be
He's
breathing?
moving. Chest move.
Oh, does he do that?
Yeah, it's chest move. Stop saying. You said that you've
Oh,
done
yeah.
simulation before, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Cool.
anything else you're going to do now?
Not really.
Okay, good. Right. I'm the person you're going to hand over to then.
Okay, I've done some obs.
And what are they?
It's on the screen.
Okay, great. Let's call it a day, yeah?
So one of the things I'll just spot with this, and obviously this is a slight exaggeration of some of the things, but we have actually seen these things occur.
Absolutely.
Really opening up to the floor to have a bit of discussion about things you spotted. So if anyone wants to add anything to the chat, please feel free, or we can open up the microphone if anyone wants to speak.
So just while you're getting yourselves ready to pop in your thoughts or pop your hand up so that our colleagues can feed you through to us. I recently showed this video to some people and some of the feedback is interesting. A lot of people feeling sorry for Tom. Trust me, he's fine, he's big boy, it's okay. This is, like Tom said, it's not, maybe it's a bit fictional, but actually all of the things that were included in that video are actually things that we've seen, and we just put them all in one space. And some thoughts that were had by the people that I was speaking to were saying things like that person was not set up for success, and that they were never going to succeed in that simulation, just a general sense of bemusement that actually something like that would take place. But you know, like I said, we've actually seen this.
Yeah, I think things, you know, there's some very clear things that happened in that video. I think even just looking at it from a body language perspective, we're actually quite good mates, but you wouldn't have known by the reaction we started to get. And I think we both started to feel awkward about it.
I actually felt like we were squaring up to each other at the end there. It's just it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'm just seeing some things come through to the chat. So they didn't know or understand the equipment. I think that's absolutely key.
Yeah.
You know, someone going through the kit as the simulation is happening is probably going to cause some issues.
I think just tied in with that as well, if I may, is one of the issues there is that there's actually equipment out that isn't to be used. So why is it out in the first place? You know, not only are we not explaining to the learner that actually they're not meant to use it, we've got it out. Why is it out? Why is it there? And again, we've seen this. You have simulation labs where everything is set up, everything is in place, but actually is it set up specifically for that sim?
There's a great message here. It says being used to trick students. I think that's absolutely true. We see this quite a lot where we see kind of the evil genius behind the scenes who's unwilling to tell people what the simulation's about, and almost like they want to catch people out.
Yeah.
And I think erroneous equipment, time not to prepare is almost designed to cause that anxiety. So really leads us on to conversation about tools and how we can use tools to kind of make things better for the learner.
Because one thing we're clear about there was no tool. There was no tool being used. And there was something very specific that was one of the things that we mentioned specifically there was in the role that was given. Did anyone pick up on that? Did anyone mention that? Pause for a second just to see. I don't think
There's nothing coming in the chat.
But yeah, I think you'll have noticed that. So Tom professionally is a paramedic, and in that scenario, he was actually made a consultant, and then that was used as a weapon against him later on. So not only are we asking him to imagine being a consultant, we then berate him for not knowing what a consultant would know. So
I've just seen that Naomi, you had your hand up there. You're more than welcome to unmute and speak. We should be able to hear you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Naomi from Keele University. I can't see the chat. Can I just ask if anyone else is writing in it? It just says chat disabled at this end.
We'll leave you with so one of our colleagues will be able to sort that out behind the scenes. What were you going to put in it? Can I ask you what you were going to put in the chat, Naomi?
Well, primarily, I was slightly confused that you were saying, "Oh, look at these wonderful comments," and I was going to agree with some, and obviously there was key elements then there of trickery and elements of that. But I was getting distracted by the fact that I couldn't engage more than anything else.
Bless you. Okay, all right. Let's just use this as an opportunity. Any thoughts on the video? So any of it relate to you or what you've seen or what you've experienced?
Yes, in terms of, I've seen this happen a lot. I might equally be guilty of some of those elements of even myself in the early years of entering simulation. I might have said, there's lots here that we've set it up with equipment that you may not need to use as well, and sort of almost it's that almost drip feeding the information at the beginning or throughout, rather than actually just understanding your person at the very beginning and telling them what the focus is. But I think I've learned I've moved on a little bit by this point, but I did recognize my early self in there.
Thanks for sharing, Naomi. And actually, if I may, I think to be fair, there's a lot of assumptions that are made around simulation, and that the assumptions generally along the lines of just because you're a clinician, it means you can teach, and just because you're a clinician who teaches, you know about simulation. And so a lot of people, Naomi wouldn't have been alone there, and I guess a lot of other people can relate to that. In that, you're thrown into these environments, and you're kind of doing this and you're trying to figure it out as you go along. And so Naomi wouldn't have been alone with that. But thank you for sharing, Naomi.
Thank you, Darren. We also have Andy Buttery, who's put their hand up to speak.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Oh, Happy New Year, by the way, and lovely to see you, Darren, looking so well. My point is that what you have to be careful about is that people don't become good at doing simulation rather than doing their job. And so the prep so that the simulation is going to translate into practice is essential. And one of the issues that I find when the preparation isn't good is that willing participants will start to invent reality to back up where the simulation fails.
That's true.
And this can be really troublesome. So they have a phone, but the phone doesn't work. So they start inventing conversations on it and things like that. So that was just my observation about the problems from
I think that happens quite a lot, actually. You've seen that sort of mission creep, I'd call it, where things start to change from what you were initially set out to do. So I think that actually fits in really well with what we're going to move on to. So
Thank you, Andy. That was a really good point. I've got some interesting anecdotes about that along the line of what Andy's just said there. But no, thank you for that. One first tool that we're going to cover is the core briefing tool. Okay, and hopefully that will start to combat some of the issues that we've just seen.
Yeah. So core briefing, as you can see on the page there, it's essentially 3 columns of information. I think the way I kind of view this is if someone's going to play the game of simulation, I use the word game loosely. You know, they need to know the rules of the game, and I think that's a really, really important part of it. So setting out what we need to get from that simulation in the initial stage is really, really important. So I'll just start by going through safety and context and just have a little conversation around that. So the first thing on there is safe learning environment, and I think what we've observed a few times is a safe learning environment becomes this kind of throwaway statement that fits in and it's a tick. Yeah, that's done, if it's done at all. And what actually does that mean? You know, what does that mean to the individual that's the learner? What does safe learning environment mean to someone that's a participant in the simulation? Often we're putting them in stressful situations anyway. You know, there's anxiety around their performance, there's anxiety around competence, there might be anxiety about performing in front of their peers. All these things need to be taken into consideration when we're talking about that safe learning environment. So how do we manage that? How do we actually grow that one statement? I think it's about, hey, this is the formative environment. You know, we're here to learn, kind of making people feel that it's a comfortable place. If it is a summative thing, then it needs to be, this is a summative environment. However, anything that happens within this simulation, we'll take out together rather than it being kind of taken away from them and the control taken away from them, if that makes sense. And I think that leads quite well into confidentiality. So, you know, think about groups of people doing simulation together and leading into that anxiety of performance anxiety, or am I doing this well enough? Am I being watched by my peers? Am I being watched by my manager or my supervisor and whatever role that's in? You know, confidentiality is massively important as well, to have the conversation beforehand to say, hey, this space is somewhere we can work together to learn, rather than, you know, this is going to be something that's going to be talked about, you know, when you're having your tea break. So making sure that confidentiality element is covered, and almost the best way I think is to have almost like a learner's contract.
I agree. Yeah, I think because you'll have seen from the video, and that this wasn't really covered, was it? I think there might have been a mention of a safe space, but then not following anything. And again, these are things that we've actually seen. I watched myself a simulation that started with this is a safe learning environment, and followed by something that was incredibly unsafe, both in terms of physical safety and actual psychological safety for the candidate as well. I've seen confidentiality become an issue where simulations may be being used in a particular way, almost as a weapon, weaponizing simulation in order to cause people problems. So, you know, these are things that have an impact on people, and if we're covering them, we need to say why, like Tom says. Yeah, absolutely.
I think anything that leaves a simulation environment should be done in agreement with the person that's
it's empowerment as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So the next element on there is curriculum integration. And you might think, okay, that's only for academics, but I don't think that's true. I think knowing why you're playing the game is really important. So, you know, it might be in the NHS setting, it might be as a result of a red flag or a Datex incident or something like that we've decided to simulate. It might be, you know, in a university where it's part of an advanced practice module or something. So knowing where that simulation fits in is really, really important, and just iterating that, really.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that whether it's university or it's hospital, we're dealing with adult learners, and adult learners need to know the relevancy in order for them to fully engage. And so if we want our candidates, our learners, to fully engage in the simulation, and we do, then, you know, they need to know why it's relevant. It's relevant. Why is it relevant? So like Tom said, I think, you know, if it's in a hospital setting, you know, it's because we have this red flag, or we have this emergency, or this is an area that we need to work on. The university, you know, your curriculum, you know, not just curriculum for curriculum's sake, but almost, you know, you're learning this because one day.
Definitely the why.
Yeah.
So next thing is a timeline. I'm just thinking, actually, what I haven't mentioned, I often use this briefing. If I'm briefing people, I'll actually have it up in front of me so they can see where we are, and they can see where they are in that briefing format. So timeline really is a big part of that, to say, hey, this briefing is going to last for 10 minutes and the simulation is going to last for 20 minutes. And then I'm going to say something, I can sense the eye roll, but the debriefing is going to take 40 minutes. So we say ideally that the debriefing would take longer than the actual simulation. We know that's an unreality sometimes. We know that managing multiple students and going through and expecting that you're going to have double the time to debrief than you would do to kind of to do the simulation itself is a bit of an unreality. So there are some ways of managing that. I think sometimes a centralised brief at the beginning is really useful, and then a centralised debrief at the end. Picking out the pertinent points would be really, really powerful as well. And I think actually people need to act better at that.
No.
The timeline, I think, does spell that out where they're going to be. And
I'd be interested as well, just a thought for our discussion that follows this section, after we watch the video, is what are your ways of combating this? Because these are conversations that we have all the time. We understand at times we're presenting a utopian version of running simulation, and that we don't necessarily have the time or the means to do some of this stuff. But that doesn't mean that we should just let go and just do whatever. Then we should actually strive for being excellent and being awesome. And so, how do you overcome this? So if you're in a university and you're dealing with hundreds of students that you're putting through, how do you incorporate this into what you're doing? And if you're in a hospital with time pressures of a different nature, getting people involved, because getting people on clinical shifts to do education, how do you get past that? What are your thoughts? So have a think about that for our discussion following the video.
Yeah. So the next bit is support measures. I think this is massively important. There's a buzz phrase essentially of psychological safety, but actually, if you set that safe environment for them to know that it is safe, it is confidential, then their support measures can fit within this. So sometimes we do, as I've mentioned there, we've done high stress, high stakes sometimes simulation. Also, we do simulation things that may be really, really triggering for individuals. I've physically seen this, not in my own sort of simulation, but I've seen it where someone has been triggered in an event and being stopped at the door. What's the matter? In front of people. So having some sort of way of managing that and just say, hey, if this is a triggering event for you, so for example, doing paediatric life support or something like that might be something that someone might find difficult. You can say you can just leave. It's fine. We'll follow you up with the appropriate support afterwards. So I think considering psychological safety is really, really important. And simulation, let's face it, can be quite triggering. Especially if we are doing things that are red flag events and things as we mentioned earlier.
Just generally, we're putting people under stress, aren't we, mate? We're putting people under stress when we're putting them through simulation. So we need to factor that in.
Yeah, and just think about red flag events. Obviously, we'd never suggest using the same people that have been in that environment to re-simulate it. But sometimes, there may be people close to that or close to that within the teams, and that might be something else that's that can be triggering. So, just having the right measures in place with the immediate sort of follow up and giving people space to leave it if they do feel overwhelmed, I think is really important.
I think it's just, and tying in with some possible conversation topics for later on. I know that there's some concern about offering outs for learners going into sim because it might just be deemed as a way of getting out of putting themselves into an uncomfortable situation, really. And again, there was some interesting conversations around that about how we tackle this or how we might cover this, and to the point where we still need to give people the opt out. People still need to be able to have that safety mechanism for themselves. But it doesn't mean that everyone should just be allowed to just drop out. It should be qualified. We should think about what we're doing. The idea is really just to think about it. Let's think about what we're doing and what we're offering people. If we don't give them anything, then there's nothing to be taken advantage of. So once we're finished with safety and context, we then move on to patient and equipment. And the first of those is introduction to the patient. Now, regardless of what you have, whether it's a simulator, it is a patient actor, it's a sack of spuds, whatever it is, you need to introduce your learner to them, because your learner needs to know what they can do and what they can't do. Okay, so if it's a simulator, what are the features of that simulator that need to be shown? So in the video example that we saw there was no orientation to the simulator whatsoever. And what we found was, Tom just didn't know what he was doing, what to do with it. Didn't know it breathed, didn't know I could speak to it. And why would he know if we didn't give him an orientation? So if we're going to use a simulator, then let's give them a brief. Now, I'm not saying give them a whole getting started with blah, blah, blah course. No. Keep it focused. Keep it focused on the things that they're going to need to use in the sim.
You need to know it breathes. You need to know the pulses are here. You need to know it can
Let's
speak.
talk. Yeah, absolutely. And now, if it's a patient actor, then there's a whole other series of considerations we need to make there. You know, what can and can't we do? What is appropriate and what isn't? Okay, and so again, with a patient actor, we need to give the student the rules of the game so that they know how to interact with that person, what they're going to get. And if we're doing that with a simulator, or we're doing that with a patient actor, or whatever it is that we're using, we're also got to use it, do it with the area that we're in, the area that we're working in, and the equipment that's contained inside it. So if we're in a simulation lab, or we're in a simulation room, you know, by its very nature, that environment is not real, although we might try to make it look real. But what is real in it? What can we interact with? So is that crash buzzer a real crash buzzer? Can I push it without actually causing a problem to the organization that I work with? Pull cord, the phone, the light. You know, you need to show them what they can and can't do inside the environment that they're in. And it's the same for the equipment as well. So in that environment that Tom was in there, you know, there was no orientation to the environment about what he could do inside it. And more pertinent even that in that sim, it was about the equipment. What equipment was real, what wasn't, what can he do with it? And are they familiar with it? One thing that I've found is that we shouldn't just take people's word for it. You know, I think quite often, you know, when you're going into a simulation, or you're quite stressful, you're thinking about what's coming and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, if you just ask, you know, are you fine with this? And people will just say, yeah. Quite often, you know, we need to just check in on that, check that it is. Actually saw at a wonderful place that I was at. I won't tell you where, but they did just that. So we were practicing, and they said they were doing the briefing, and they were like, you know, are you comfortable with the environment? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And then what I watched was the whole simulation where they didn't know whether the buzzers worked and what they could do with this and do with that.
That links into what Andy said actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, completely. And you just create a whole environment then that isn't real, just like Andy said. And so, you know, if we fill in the gaps where we need to fill in the gaps, and then hopefully we'll keep the simulation on track or where you need it to go. Lastly on there is how to call for help. Now, this is not in keeping with Tom's support measures from safety and context. This is how they actually seek assistance in the simulation, because regardless of where we are, whether it's hospital or whatever, if it's appropriate for the person to get assistance, then we need to offer that assistance, because that makes it more real, you know? And so the learner needs to know how to do that. So again, and it kind of ties in with the area, does that phone work? If it does work, can I call it? Will I speak to the right person? Blah, blah, blah. Radio, if I speak to someone on that radio, you need to tell them how they seek assistance from outside if it is relevant for the sim.
I think there's the danger there, going back to what Andy said about that kind of growing into kind of an amateur dramatic society thing. I think you can kind of, you know, if you're going to know who to call for help and kind of how to call for help, that person needs to be actually knowledgeable in the role that they're playing as well. Yeah. I think that's really important to say, okay, if you're going to be the consultant anaesthetist, please give me information that is consultant anaesthetist knows, rather than just making something up. So I think that's another key bit.
I don't know whether, forgive me, I don't know whether I've ever told you this, but I watched the simulation once where they were in a room and there was a sink in the room, and they walked past the sink. That worked. They walked past the sink to an imaginary sink in their head, and they imaginary washed their hands and went through the entire motion beautifully, beautiful hand washing technique with an imaginary sink, despite the fact there was a sink behind. And so, yeah, these are the things that we just want to clarify to avoid people getting lost. You know, because she could have been, you know, if we were going to follow Andy's thought process there, she could have been washing her hands, the water could have been hot, and then she's like, okay, go to another. They'll fill in the gaps themselves.
Brilliant. Let's move on to scenario and learning objectives. So, as we've kind of talked about, really, all these little bits of information actually key into this, but the overview of the simulation. What game are we playing, essentially? You know, what is it? What's actually happening? Where am I? And actually, that overview of the simulation tends to be what we see as the default brief. Okay, you are in an ED, you've got a 47-year-old bloke with chest pain, and that's where we are.
Yeah.
Go. You know, so actually it is important, but actually there's a lot of other stuff that needs to support that information so they can go around it. So just an overview of the simulation, I think that makes it fairly clear. So following on from that, I think roles and expectations of participants. So that kind of links back to what I was talking about with confidentiality and support measures and all those bits we talked about in a safe learning environment. Having that conversation, I think, to say, hey, yes, this is simulation, but this is the expectation on you within this simulation. Often I've seen in debriefs the kind of nonsense of, yeah, well, it's just a sim, or I didn't really know much about it, it's just a sim, doesn't really matter. You know, actually, if you've had that conversation initially with somebody to say, I want you to act as if this is your real role, okay, I want you to, anything that you do come up against, you know, we'll inject if we need to, okay, and I want you to be able to get real learning from this. It's really, really important that they are invested in it. A little bit of that actually sits with the person that's running it or the person that's proctoring that simulation, you know, to give them the cues to make it feel real. And I think cues are really, really important. But actually having that conversation around, hey, this is you as an individual, please work within your scope of practice, and you know, and off we go. Leading into that, right at the end really would be the learning objectives. So I would probably state the learning objectives, making sure that they are smart objectives, making sure that they, you know, kind of they're actually measurable. And I would also get them to repeat back to me in their own terms what the learning objectives are, just so I know that there's understanding going on. And that's kind of.
And we've seen some interesting variations on that as well, haven't we? Where you know, so if one of the learning objectives or learning outcomes is to be is to do an A-to-B assessment, then you know there's just a very quick Q&A just to make sure, and because we had an interesting conversation, you know, so if the learners are not sure, about how to do an A-to-B assessment, any worth in running the simulation. So thoughts, food for thoughts. You know, if our learners are not aware or comfortable with learning outcomes, if they're not familiar with them, is it worth doing the sim in the first place? These are questions that we should ask. Again, food for thought. Think about it.
Cool.
Okay. So now that we've gone through our first tool called briefing, we just want to show you this short video. Again, what the simulation would look like following an example of a core briefing taking place.
Hi. This is your brief for your simulation, okay? And you can feel free to follow as we go along there. Okay, so this is the format that I'll be using, okay? So beginning with safety and context, just to let you know that this is a safe learning environment, okay? And I know a lot of people pay lip service to that, but I want to qualify it for you, okay? This is a place that you can learn. And as a result, when we're learning, we might make mistakes, we might be really successful, but you are safe to do either in this environment, okay?
Yeah.
The important thing here is that we learn in a nice environment and we take something away from it, okay? So it's not about assessing you or criticising you or anything like that, okay? Yeah. And tied into that as well, about confidentiality, what happens here should stay here, all right? It's between you, I, and these four walls. And if we're going to take it further, then we do it with agreements with each other. Okay. Okay. Yeah. All right. This session is based on the assessment module in your curriculum, so you should be aware of why you're here. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So just a little bit of a timeline, just covering what's going to happen next. We're obviously in the brief section. It will take about 5-10 minutes to do that, to make sure that we're happy. And then what we will do is we will run the simulation, which will then take 10 to 15 minutes. And then beyond that, we'll have a debrief. And we're looking about 30 to 45 minutes for that. Okay. Okay. All right. In terms of support measures, just to let you know, if during the simulation you don't feel comfortable, you feel like you need to step away, you need time out, then please feel free to say so. Okay, it's absolutely fine. There's no point persevering with it if we're not happy. So you feel completely comfortable to call time if you need to. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Over on to patients and equipment. This is going to be your patient today. It's going to be a sim on ALS. Are you familiar with him?
Kind of. I've done a little bit with him, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You don't need to know the ins and outs of him. Just like now as a full patient simulator, you will need to pay particular attention to pulse sites. And so just to reiterate where they are, you've got carotid, and again, feel free to touch as we go through these if you want a little feel. So you've got your carotid at the top, yeah. You've got a brachial, and then a radial, and then just to highlight a key point here, that on similar ALS, the pulses are only on the left-hand side, so they're not on the right.
Okay.
So you won't find any pulse sites on that. If you need femoral at any point during the simulation, there is a femoral site as well, and it's just either side of the groin, and those place there. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, mate.
Other than that, his chest does move as he breathes. So if you need to do a respiratory rate, you can access it through the simulator, and you should be able to see that working now.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's good, yeah.
And then everything else will be on the patient monitor. So this is based on a life pack. So if you're familiar with a life pack,
yeah.
It is a touch screen, so as you need anything, you will touch the screen to indicate the vital sign that you want.
Okay.
And the only exception here is the SpO2 probe. It is an actual probe connected to the screen.
Oh, is it this one, is it?
Yeah, so if you, when you pop that on the finger for the simulator, you'll then get a reading.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yeah.
And for the blood pressure, although that cuff is not physically connected to it, we would like you to put that cuff on before you click on the screen.
No problems.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. Does he talk or anything? Does he? Or?
He can talk, yeah, so if he's going to communicate with you, he will.
Brilliant.
Okay?
That's good. Thanks.
As far as the area is concerned, so this is a simulation lab, it's meant to be an A&E cubicle, and so you've basically got the equipment, the bed, the patient monitor that you need.
Do I need any kit from the
You won't need anything during the simulation, but it is a fully equipped one anyway.
Okay, thanks.
If you need to call for help, there's no means of calling for help from this room, but I will be in the room with you. So if you feel like you need to escalate the simulation,
so you've got the consultant.
I'll be like the consultant in the room. So if you do need to speak to me, I will be there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Then over to scenario and learning objectives.
Yep.
Just to be clear, that this is a 25-year-old male. His name is Paul. He's been brought into A&E today, and that is where you are working. Okay, so you're on shift. He is reporting of feeling unwell, and you have been sent over to just do an initial assessment. Okay, looking at his vital signs.
No problems.
Right. You are a paramedic on secondment to the unit.
Yeah.
So you are to act within the realms of your profession. You don't need to pretend to be anything that you're not. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And then just to close off here, learning outcomes. Can you remember what the learning outcomes for this for the session were?
Yeah, to conduct an A to E assessment, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're going to do that within the 10 minutes for the session.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got any questions?
No, that's really clear. Thank you very much. Cheers. Great, so I hope that was useful to watch. I've just seen a couple of questions in the chat, which I'll endeavour to answer. I think there's a couple of really good points actually. One was about giving the game away essentially. So if we speak to if we say what we're going to do this scenario, and you're telling the story of that scenario, does that kind of steal from the value of the simulation? I kind of don't think it does. And I think actually I've seen medical students, for example, saying they're going to go into a medical scenario, and then they're thinking to themselves, right, the whole of medicine, right? What am I going into? Am I going to go into an ankle assessment, or is it going to be lung function, or is it going to be a GU assessment? Anything. It could be literally anything. Yeah. So I think that's a really, really dangerous space for people to be in. And I think it links back to that safe learning environment to say, actually, you're going to treat a 57-year-old asthma patient. Yeah. I don't think that matters, because I think what happens, you still got the creative license to change the scenario within that scenario. Okay, so you can still make things happen. They don't know at minute 5 their breath is going to get difficult. They don't know that stuff. They're just prepared for what's coming. And I think even in my own practice as a paramedic, generally, it might be a little bit spurious if I see something come up on the screen to say that's what I'm headed to. I've got a rough idea, and I can work my way through that before I arrive, in my head. So that sort of rehearsal. I think it's fair to give people that experience within simulation.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more, mate. Actually, I think if you're doing a course or a module, we always start these courses and modules with learning outcomes. What we're hoping to achieve during it. Why would a simulation be any different? And I think I understand where that thought comes from. Actually, because I've heard it myself, and God forbid, actually, I think you think it sometimes yourself, And it's not, we shouldn't think of it along the lines of giving the game away, because it's not meant to be a surprise. You know, we're meant to be engaging in learning and understanding and whatnot. And if we think about why we're doing the simulation in the first place, it's to try and understand why an action is taking place. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And we're not going to give that away by being clear on what is expected from our learners in that environment. Because like Tom said there, you know, if we're not clear, is it the whole of medicine that I'm about to look into? You know, so no, I think I get where it comes from, absolutely. And it's trying to find that balance. You know, we're not saying in minute one this will happen followed by this, and we're expecting you to do this, that, and that. But I think we should be clear on what we're hoping to achieve and what it's based on.
That's great. There's also a really interesting conversation on neurodiverse students. You know, and I think that's actually, frankly, I'm neurodiverse myself, and I find that personally quite a steady way of having a handrail to what's expected. Also, I think reframing learning outcomes and stuff like that to be something that I can then explain is another way for me personally to be comfortable with what I'm about to do. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know if that's helpful. There's probably wider conversations to have on that, and everybody's different. But I think there's, you know, for me personally, I quite like it. I quite like the structure. And
I think the point. I don't think we'll be able to answer that in this time frame. But I think actually the fact that you're thinking that is great, because you know all our learners will be different, and you know, have we got enough time, resource to meet everybody's needs? Probably not, but we can try, and you know, we should aim for that and aim to meet as many people's needs as we can. And so the very fact that you're thinking and asking that is a good thing. And again, you know, if anyone's got anything to share on that, then please do.
Yeah, please. Yeah. The floor is open, so if anyone has got anything to comment on those on that video previously. I mean, can you see the difference just in the information it's got across? That only took 5 minutes, really, that brief, and actually the outcome from that, I think, is massive. You know, just to spend that time to do it. And if you're doubling that up and you're doing that to an audience, a larger group, I think you're hitting a lot of bases.
I've seen as well where time is precious. You know, I know it's precious for everyone. I get that, but where time is precious, you know, we've seen people doing generic equipment orientations and environment orientations, so that when you come to your actual simulation, we're able to not skim past it, but we're able to move through it far more quickly, because we know that there's a level of understanding that our learners got.
Was there a question from Fajesh? Just looking at the chat.
Hello, Darren and Thomas. Fajesh has put their hand down. I might defer at the moment, but the floor is open if one or two others wanted to raise their hand. I can unmute them if they'd like to ask their question direct.
Thanks, Emma. We'll give you a couple of seconds.
Cool.
Awesome. Okay. Right. So if you still got a thought, just don't worry. Keep it, and we'll come to it. We'll come to it as we move on. So, what follows now is a look at the simulation that takes place with a core briefing. And the reason why we're showing you this is because then we're going to look at actually using the core debriefing tool, which is the second tool to debrief. So I'm just going to show you this next video, and this will just show you, and hopefully you will imagine that this is how the simulation might take place.
Yeah, there's a couple of obvious mistakes, but that's so we can have something to debrief back on. But you'll see that as we go through.
Okay, right, so your simulation has now begun.
Brilliant. Hi, is it Paul?
Yeah, it's Paul.
Hi Paul, how are you doing? My name's Tom. I'm one of the paramedics working here at A&E. Just going to do a quick assessment, obs on you if that's all right, just a quick assessment, see how you're doing. I know that you're coming generally unwell today. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
No problems. So can you tell me a little bit about what's happened, Paul, just so I'm aware?
Oh, I just didn't feel great today, and I spoke to 111, and they said I should come in and get checked over at A&E.
Right, no problems. I'll do that for you now. Right, so I'm just going to do a couple of tests on you, if that's all right. So obviously I'm talking to you, and so for consideration for the simulation, obviously it's got an airway,
and that's painting it and he's holding it and he's having a conversation. The next thing I'm going to do, Paul, is I'm going to have just check your breathing, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm just going to put my hand on your chest, okay? Just observe my watch. Okay, so over a period of 30 seconds, I got 6, so over a minute, his rest rate is 12. So your breathing rate's fine at the moment, Paul. I'm just going to have a little listen to your chest, if that's all right, just make sure everything's okay. I'm just going to have to undo your jacket, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
No problems, thank you. Nice and clear on the front. I'm just going to lean you forward, Paul, if that's all right. So a little listen to your back. Okay, Paul, so your chest is nice and clear. There's no signs of any consolidation or anything on the chest, which is also good. So I don't think there's any infection or anything going on. Just going to zip this back up for you for now.
Thank you.
I'm now just going to move on to circulation. I'm just going to check Paul's pulse, but I can also use this. Paul, I'm just going to quickly pop this onto your finger if that's okay.
That's okay.
And I'm going to turn my equipment on. Lovely. Okay, so I've got nice saturations bobbing along there at 99, which is great, which is on air. I'm just going to take your pulse. I've got a nice strong radial pulse. Okay, we've got 20 over 15 seconds, so 40 over 30 seconds and 80 over a minute. I'm just also going to pop, just if you don't know why you're feeling unwell, Paul, I'm just going to do a little ECG, if that's okay. It's just a very quick diagnostic just to see what's going on.
That's okay.
Just going to unzip your jacket again. Excuse me, Paul. There we go. ECG reads are on. So I'm seeing normal sinus rhythm and a heart rate congruent with what I was expecting. So that's good. So no issues with your heart at the moment from what I can see there. So that all looks normal. That's normal sinus rhythm at a rate of 80. And I can't feel any peripheral coldness for that either, so it's good. So next thing we're going to do is check for disability support. Obviously we've been having a conversation, so I'm aware that your GCS is 15. However, I'm just going to check your eyes and make sure that your eyes are working okay as well. So we're just checking for a normal response from your pupils. So I'm just going to cover over your eye. Okay, it's normal and reactive. I'm just going to change that to the other side, Paul. Just look at my nose. great. And then lastly, on consider environment. Obviously, we're in a nice warm hospital. I just need to do BP actually for 2 seconds. So just going to pop this on. That's okay. Right, you just feel it's getting tight in your arm there, Paul. Okay, just be getting tight. So good news is everything I found so far is okay. Just waiting for that last bit, which is your blood pressure, which is all looking okay for now. Yeah, absolutely textbook, Paul. You've got 120 over 80. It's probably better than mine. Right, I'm just going to hand over to my colleague now, if that's all right, as I think I've completed my A2E assessment.
That's the end of your simulation.
Thanks.
So, why did we show you that? Hopefully, so you could just make a contrast between a poor run simulation from the first one and hopefully a well-run simulation following a good brief. Okay, so we showed you for that reason. And secondly, we want you to start thinking about how you might debrief that session. Because that's going to form our next part where we look at the core debriefing model, which is our second tool that we're going to discuss. So what have we done so far? We've looked at a poor brief followed by a poor sim. Then we've looked at a brief that's followed the core briefing model, and then a simulation that followed on from that. So that's where we are so far. Have we got anything that we need to discuss before we move on, Tom?
The only thing I'd just mention would be potentially just think about it from that learner's perspective. You know, you probably watched that and saw the engagement was 20 times over what the previous one was, where he was treated like a mannequin. In this case, he was treated like a person, and I think that's quite important. So just have a think about how the decent brief actually allowed that to happen.
Yeah, I think it was quite telling as well that there's no frustration.
Yeah.
I think the learner, Tom, in that case, you know, was far more relaxed and we didn't start off on a bad light. So you know, I think that was the main thing that left out from the expedition.
Is anyone got any observations just from watching that at all? We'll leave it a couple of minutes and then we'll move on if not. But feel free.
Got anything on the chat?
No,
nothing.
If anyone wanted to raise their hand, I can help unmute, and you can have your chance to ask a question.
Thank you.
Not at the moment, guys.
No, we're good. We'll move on. Right, so to core debriefing. So this is our second tool that we wish to share with you today. Begins with context. So core itself is just an acronym, and so the C is context, O is observation, R is reflection, E is enhancing practice. And what you'll find as we talk through this actually is that a lot of this will again resonate with you. It's probably things that you already do, and this is just our way of explaining it, and we like it in this way. So that's why we want to share it with you. Okay.
Again, I was going to say I would usually have this up so that they can actually see where they are within that debriefing process.
Yeah, it's part of just being upfront and open with our learners from the offset. You know, this is what a brief looks like in this organisation. This is what our debrief looks like. This is what we're going to aim to achieve.
So I've actually put these up on walls, which is really good. So
that's it. And so whatever model it is you use, whatever model you're comfortable with, even if you like our model, whatever it is, you know, share it with your learners, because you know from that will come a sense of how things are going to operate and going to run, you know, and so it gives people an insight. So we're going to begin with C, which is context. And what we do at this point is we really lay down a lot of the logistics of the debrief to follow, and let people know where they are. Okay. The first thing that we do here is really important, and it's not talk about time. Actually, begin with immediate reactions. Okay, so rather, despite how it looks on there, actually the first thing we do within C is go for immediate reactions. And it's the immediate reactions of the participants that have just been involved in the simulation. Because I have seen from real life experience, I've seen a simulation that has ended. They look at each other and they go, "Oh my God, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. That was just awful." And in the 5 minutes it took to leave that environment and start the debrief, that had become, "Yeah, we were all right, actually, that was good." And it was only in capturing that immediate reaction from them that you were able to then raise it and say, "Guys, you know, I observed that you said this, you know, why did you think that? Why was that your immediate response to what was going on?" And you're able to address something. And so this is what we're aiming for. You know, you'll get some real awesome material from those immediate reactions. And so we want to capture them and not lose them. Okay.
Certainly from facilitating a debrief point, actually that's the goal that you want. You know, you want to be able to look at that individual and go, okay, that person said confident, that person said nervous, that person, you know. So I personally try to get an immediate reaction just to be one word, so I can drill into that one word later on. And I think it's important if you're moving from one place to another, you know, to keep the lid on it essentially until you're in that debriefing space, because otherwise people influence each other and you end up with a median. You end up with, I thought it was fantastic, you thought it was rubbish, and then some way we meet in the middle.
Yeah. And so that, again, you know, if you've got any thoughts on that, any things that you want to share, then please do. But, you know, how do you capture it? You know, if your debriefing room is away from your simulation area, you know, then you're going to have a walk. So what do we say? Do we say, "Guys, let's just not discuss it, we'll discuss it when we get in the room, hold your thoughts till we get there"? Or do you try and capture it straight away in that room and then move into the debriefing room? There's no right or wrong answer here, just interested in what your thoughts are, but I think it's important that we do try and capture it. So first thing we do within C, context, is capture immediate reactions from our participants. Next is time, and again, it's just laying down the time frame of what's to be expected. You know, we're currently in the debrief, it's going to last about 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever you roughly think it is, whatever time's allowed, actually, you know, just let them know. The reason why this is important is if you don't, people will start to, you know, fill in some of those blanks themselves, and if they're disorientated and not aware of where they are, then they might not necessarily give the best answers that they would have given otherwise if they were confident about, you know, exactly how long they were going to be there. Mm-hmm. So give them the time, and then talk them through, remind them what core means, or remind them what model it is that you're using. You know, so if we're using core, we're saying that we're currently in the context where we're laying out the logistics of what's to follow. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have an observation where we look chronologically through what has happened. And how you do that is up to you, with the time and the equipment that you've got allowed. So, you know, in the example that we're going to show you, what we do is we watch it back on our AV system, which is SimCapture. But, you know, you're able to do that yourself or with your own system, wherever it is.
Or reach a group consensus.
Or about watching consensus. Yeah. I just ask,
yeah.
You know, or did you have an observer who wrote things down? You know, so then you talk about you're going to then have a reflection and then enhancing practice. So part of phases is that you're just laying out where, you know, what is to follow, so they know where they are. They know how long it's going to take and they know where they are. Next, repeat the learning outcomes, learning objectives. Just double check, you know, what is it? Because these are the things that we want to keep a mind on, keep our eye on with our reflection that follows.
Personally, I'd seek that from them. I'd say, hey, what were the learning objectives of this session? That way I then know that there's an understanding. If you need to reframe it there, that's a good place to do it. Yeah. Because then you can say, actually, now that actually generates the rest of the conversation around where it's going to go.
Yeah. So I'll just go, and then Tom will cover reflection and enhancing practice. So once we've done that, we'll then go straight into the observation. And it's like we've just been talking about there. It's a chronological look at what has happened. It's factual. It's time-based. This happened, this happened, this happened. It's not necessarily how they felt or what was going on, because we're going to cover that in the reflection. We just want to keep it accurate to the point what happened. The reason why is we want everyone to be aware of what has happened, be comfortable with that account, so that we can then debrief better as a group, because we're all on the same page.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bits just for observation. I think often steering that is quite difficult sometimes, because people's natural reaction is to tell you how they did. Yeah. And you need to say, no, this is the non-emotional, this is just a factual account of events. I think as well, we'll probably see this in your debrief, and this might align, but I kind of think sometimes within a group, if you're doing a group debrief, there's often different character types. Sometimes there's a sort of black hole kind of individual that kind of pulls everything in. Oh no, everything was terrible, it was the worst. And then you have, even more difficult to debrief, is the really highly confident person who thinks that they did great, and there's no ability to kind of like the kind of back think, you know, you can't hit me with a wing to steal kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's quite challenging. So reflection, I think, is the time when you can sort of steer that and you can have a conversation around those things. So there's some lovely tools here that we've got here just on the bottom. It says A&I and 5 times why. Now these are 2 tools, they're not the only tools, they're not exclusive, but they're the ones we like to use. And you have advocacy and inquiry, which is our A&I, and that's essentially evidence suggests this, I saw this, and you did this. Can you explain? You know, it can be that sort of conversation. And then 5 times why, which is really nice to use and really easy. It feels a bit awkward first time you do it as a kind of facilitator, but so Darren, how did that simulation go for you?
All right.
Why was it all right?
Because I thought it was good.
Why was it good? Yeah, so it can feel a bit awkward, but you can actually dig quite a bit of information out just by going into why. It's a little bit like mining, I think, for that gold. And I've had this conversation before, but it's almost like when you're facilitating the debrief, you know that there's some lessons in there, but it might be hidden. You know, so the more you chip away and you get those little bits, you might get that little glimmer of something that's worthwhile pursuing, and then you can go into that from a facilitation point of view. So we use words within that reflection about, you know, what were you happy about? So what went well, okay, and what would you like to change, rather than what went really badly, you know, because that's not a great way to do business.
I think what we've found as well, isn't it, from when we've had these conversations with some people, is that the guy Tom said, use the 5 times. Actually, do you know what? Just ignore the 5 times element of that. Just think of why questions. Otherwise, you might religiously follow it through to 5, and then you find out you're just having a ridiculous conversation. So why questions are really useful, like Tom's mentioned, and they use the advocacy and inquiry maybe to approach a topic that then they feel a bit worried about raising. You know, and so it might be a perceived negative, or, you know, best practice suggests this, I saw you did that, you know, so maybe using it that if they haven't picked up on that themselves.
Yeah, just a great question from Naomi actually about why questions lead into short answers. I think it depends how you do it. If you just literally go why, then you probably get a response. You get a response back that just gets that one-word answer. But you could say, you know, why is that? Go into it. I think the great thing about debriefing is you don't necessarily have to be an expert in the field that they're doing. I think you just need to be naturally curious, find out about what the rationale was behind something. And I think that's why.
In some ways as well, I think if you're not a subject matter expert and you're interested, I've seen some awesome debriefs take place with people who are just interested, and they're being able to then ask, yeah, I saw that you did this. You know,
he's actually got a hand up at the moment. So maybe feel free to
stop jibbing out.
Yeah.
It was just to clarify, I wasn't asking why questions lead to short answers. There was a bit that I added to the questions and answers prior to that. At ASPE conference, I think 2 years ago, we had a really nice keynote from a chap that was a captain in aviation, and he was making links between aviation and simulation in healthcare. One of his main takeaways that I took was switching from asking 5 why questions to actually asking how questions. So rather than why did you make that decision, because most people might then just go, oh, I did. If you ask them how did you come to make that decision, then it actually promotes the participant to consider, like, to reflect more on their actions and what then led them into that process. So I have actually switched my practice from asking 5 why to more so about asking how did you do this, or how did you come about doing that, or just it's sometimes more difficult to sort of almost phrase the question, but I have found from my own practice that people then almost stop and pause a little bit before just sort of throwing something at you so that you shut up and move on to the next person.
Do you feel like you're better equipped then to get to the root cause of the root reason why someone's done something?
I think so.
But not without challenges, though. Do you think it's more difficult to frame those questions?
Yes, that's what I mean. I mean, you can literally just say why, and you just sound like that perpetuate child, don't you? Just why, and that, you know, the frustration comes. Whereas actually, almost for you as a facilitator, if you can stop and pause and think, right, how can I frame this question to try and get you to think more deeply about it? And sometimes it can be literally saying that to somebody is, you know, I want you to really think about what's led you to that. So how have you come to, you know, engage in that person in that manner? And almost then they think more about all of the parts to their actions. So almost it might be more about considering the human actions, human factors that have led to it, or something else. I think it just slows things down because it's not as quick and easy as going why.
Yeah. Like the tool there, the why tool is quite an easy tool for the facilitator to use. You can kind of like cast it in and just watch it happen. People kind of I think the advocacy inquiry thing does add a little bit more depth when you kind of go, I witnessed this or observed this, and I wondered what, kind of how you came to that.
And yeah, that might be almost a blend of the two then. But I thought I'd share.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's one of the things about this that I like so much is that it's not precious about what's contained within it.
Yeah.
You know, and so actually if a how question works better than the why question for what you're engaging with, then you put it in there. Absolutely. I love that.
Alex,
thank you, Naomi. That's awesome.
Cheers.
Alex from the chat has put in a really good point, actually. I think it leads on to what you were talking about there, Naomi. He said student reflection can sometimes be limited. They don't know what they don't know. So how do you give your feedback and how do you focus on the task or the process? So that's a really good question. I think I kind of look at that as the unknown unknowns. You know, you kind of don't know what you don't know. You know, so how are you expected to have an opinion on how you did if you don't know? And I think that a little bit sits down to the skill of the facilitator. You can spot those if you were in those environments and you understand what kind of those little seams of gold that I was talking about are. You can kind of steer the conversation to that. And I think that comes with a little bit of experience and time debriefing, to be honest.
That's it, because this, you know, because this is a skill, isn't it? You know, and take it back to the assumptions that were being made about clinicians teaching, simulating. You know, it's like debriefing is a skill that you learn, you practice, you hone, you perfect, you assess, you review, you come back, you change. You know, it's not just something that we do. And like, you know, Naomi's journey there that she's just describing, going from this to that, based on, you know, new information and then playing with it and not seeing success. This is what we should do. We shouldn't just do this without thought or practice. We should actually really treat it with the respect it deserves. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's good. I just want to point from Carol there that why questions can sometimes come across as quite accusatory, and I think why.
Me and Tom appreciate that. Actually, I have this problem. I don't know how or why, but I find it really difficult to phrase this without sounding like I'm angry. So yeah, I go why. So no, I completely.
So why is your room a mess? Yeah. Why have you not tidied up?
Yeah, no, I'm actually going to go with Naomi's how question. That's cool. That's awesome.
So one of the things, just moving on to for that, I think reflection is really important. The reflection and the enhancing practice, I think, are the most important bits. If you don't know what you're taking away from your simulation, then it's kind of a pointless exercise. And we've actually travelled about a fair bit, and we met people that don't even debrief. They just don't debrief. You know, and you think, oh, what a loss, because actually, you know, if you don't get any reflection from it, and you don't get anything that they can actually take away into practice, then I feel that, you know, your simulation's kind of a bit wasted.
Yeah.
So I mean, enhancing practice first is a really, really good bit. And I think when we went to do our sort of faculty courses for these, that was the one thing that really stood out to me, was this kind of summarising the concrete messages to take home. So like, okay, that's great. We've had this reflection period. We found out why. You know, what's happened, why, how, sorry. We found out how and why, all those things. Okay, and then what are you actually going to do at the end of that? So, okay, so for example, we've learned that, we'll see a debrief shortly from me, but you know, there's some elements that I need to improve upon. Then we actually hold people to account and we say, okay, that's great. How are you going to do that? when are you going to do it, and almost what are you going to do? And I think probably we'll move on to seeing that. So
Yeah.
so we can.
So without no further ado, I'm just going to show you an example of me and Tom putting core into practice. So we're using our second tool. Before we do that, I just wanted to quickly mention, this will be, I'm speaking to like-minded people, and I completely appreciate that, and that's awesome. But you know, why are we doing the simulation in the first place? And so this is just from Laerdal's Circle of Learning, and I find that it helps us make sense of what we're doing as a group. And so, you know, we always begin with healthcare quality improvement. So why are we doing the sim in the first place? Is it just part of us training our new people to be awesome new clinicians, or are we clinicians who need to improve in a particular area or take action in a particular area? So that's the thing that starts the process going. And then whether and how we use the tools below is up to us. So there's a period of knowledge acquisition, so a period of training, teaching. Does that happen online, face to face? However it is we do it. Is skills proficiency required? Is it not? If it is, you know, what does it look like? What are we using it for? Same with decision making. Is it tabletop? Is it following an e-learning program? Whatever that is. And then simulation in teams, maybe what we're traditionally talking about here, where you're actually going to a simulation suite with an actor, simulator, whatever. And so healthcare quality improvement, the reason why we're doing something leads us to the other 4 areas, and we use them as required, and then brings us back to healthcare quality improvement. Are we creating the awesome clinician that we wanted to create with what we've done? Have we addressed the need? And then what we get from each of these is performance. We get data, we get information, and it's that information that we then use to feed into how we move forward in the future. We create actionable insights by observing, collecting information, and then allowing that to be the thing that
permeates into practice.
Yeah, absolutely, and creates the next healthcare quality improvement question. So that was just a brief intro there to our circle of learning and what we're doing, and we just wanted to address why simulations take place in the first place. But this is the simulation. Excuse me. This is the debrief. Forgive me, I'm not making you rewatch that. So this will be the debrief, and I'm not going to make you watch us watching the debrief.
That'd be a bit meta.
I'm gonna skip a section in a second. So forgive me.
Right, come in, Tom. Take a seat.
Thanks, mate.
So, we've just done your session.
Yeah.
And if you had to describe in one word what your immediate reactions are, what would you choose?
I'd say confident.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's great. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a debrief.
Yeah.
And I'll be using the core model to debrief.
Yeah.
Okay. It'll take about 30 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Might be a bit longer if we need it. A little bit shorter if we don't.
Okay.
All right. So just to let you know. Now, to use the core model, I'm going to go through 4 phases. Okay. Currently in the context, that's where I'm letting you know how it's going to run, basically, just so you know the logistics of it. The debrief. O is observation, and that's where we look at a chronological walkthrough of the events that have just happened, and for that we'll be using sim capture. So we're going to watch a recording of your session, and we'll watch that together, and so hopefully we'll be on the same page then. Okay, looking at the narrative. R is reflection, and that's where we will discuss our conversations about the things that the events that took place, and try and get to the root cause or the root reason why things happened. And then we'll finish off with enhancing practice, and that's where we'll look at take-home messages in particular, ultimately what you're going to take home from today.
Cool.
Okay. So before we look through your sim capture recording, can you just remind me what the learning outcomes were for the session?
Yeah, sure. It was to conduct an A2E assessment within the 10-minute time frame for a scenario.
Awesome, excellent, that's great. Right, what we'll do now is we'll watch your recording on sim capture.
Cool.
Right, so just while I find the point where we can, so you're not going. What proceeds now is the observation section where we watch the video. So this is however you do this on site yourself. 17. However you do this yourself is up to you. So watch your own A/B system, have a chat with observers, speak to the candidates. However you do it, this is you do it how you do it. But we'll have just watched the video of ourselves, and I'm not going to make you watch it. So skipping that O section, I'm moving on to R. No, I'm not. Forgive me. This is what I get for messing around with the video. 9:17. Thank you for your patience, everybody.
Okay. So we've just had a chronological walk through the events there.
Yeah.
And you happy that that's a fair and accurate reflection?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting to watch it back, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess my first question to you now in the reflection phase is, what went well?
I think my communication with the patient was good. I kind of explained everything I was doing, which I think is important. And you know, I built a bit of rapport with him.
Okay. Why do you think it's important to communicate well, and why do you think it's important to have a good rapport?
I'll probably say that you know, it's a daily experience for me to be in a healthcare setting, but it's not going to be a daily experience for them, hopefully. You know, so often, you know, they might be a bit worried or a bit anxious about what's going on. So, you know, by having a good rapport, I can build that relationship. I can make sure that they feel at ease with the situation, and you know, physiologically that has an effect. And also, you know, if it's pain or if it's anxiety, if you know things are happening, I can reduce that just by having a bit of an open communication with that individual.
And why is it important then to have that positive impact on their physiological presentation to you?
Well, it gives you a true measure of where they're at. I think sometimes, you know, if you've got anything sort of anxiety-wise or, you know, psychosomatic stuff that's happening, you know, it can actually elevate things like, you know, your readings, which is actually something else I noticed. But you know, I can have a conversation to make sure that you know they're understanding everything that's taking place, and then they're not feeling anxious and things aren't elevated. So, you know, for the case of a bleeding patient, for example, if their anxiety and they're pushing their pulse and restless, we're gonna cause damage. So I always try and communicate as best I can.
Yeah. Okay. I won't say why is it important not to bring about damage, because obviously that's self-explanatory. But in terms of in the context of you doing an assessment, why is it important to avoid that?
Well, because you want to get a baseline, you want to get the observations as they are, so you don't want to have anything that's kind of not indicative of that actual patient state.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So that's what went well. What would you improve looking at you?
Okay, I think probably looking at the order, I mean, I got thrown a little bit. I kind of came out of order a little bit, but I think I captured it back, if you know what I mean. I found the blood pressure cuff over there, for example, and I thought, oh, I should have done that in C, but I think that threw me, just from a simulation perspective. And also, I think accuracy of my information to the patient. I think I was talking about GCS at one point, which was accurate, although I knew what I meant. It's important that I'm putting that across to him.
Yeah. You are right. You as we've just observed, you did jumped around on the sequence a little, but it was your learning outcome was to perform an A-to-E assessment. It wasn't necessarily to religiously follow that.
Okay.
So you shouldn't need to be negative about yourself. But with that in mind, why is it important to follow that process, or at least try and stick as much to that process as you can?
Okay, I mean, the process is designed to deal with the most life-threatening things first. That's why we use airway breathing, you know, barring sort of big catastrophic bleeds and things like that. So, you know, A, B, C, D, E is kind of like the way of dealing with the most important thing first. So coming out of sequence can probably cause issue if you've missed something.
Yeah. And I guess in this context, is it fair to say this is quite a relaxed environment that you're communicating with you? If it was a different situation, so if it was a bit more of a stressful situation, why might it be even more important than to follow that?
Well, I think, you know, having an algorithm to follow in those times of stress means that you can just literally go along that process. It's well drilled, it's well rehearsed. I think in a kind of secondary care environment where there's other help around you, it's you know, it's still important, but you know, it doesn't have the same implications. So I think obviously this environment is slightly different to the environment I usually work in.
Yeah.
When I think there will be, you know, say for example that was a traumatic sort of case, then I'll be very religious. And I think expertise, you know, I can still gather the same information, but you know, I'd probably on reflection do it slightly differently again if I was to do it, just to make sure it kind of fitted that pathway.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned as well that you were not as accurate as you could have been with regard to GCS.
Yeah. I said to him, your GCS is 15, but I now need to check your eyes. Well, obviously, you know, eyes make up a big part of the GCS. I didn't really think about it at the time I was doing it, but I'm just watching the video back. It made me think, okay, if he does know, if he's, you know, for example, if Paul was an ex-healthcare professional, he's going to be thinking, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, you know, I kind of I wanted to make sure that, you know, what I was trying to say was I recognised the fact he was alert. You know, I knew that, you know, the verbal and the motor part of his GCS was fine, because, you know, I'm having that conversation, but I hadn't checked eyes, and I maybe didn't articulate. I mean, it's not the end of the world. It's just a.
So what I'm going to do, forgive me, is what follows next is just some more why advocacy and inquiry. But hopefully you've just seen it from the R section that I asked what went well, what would they change, and I'd used some variation on the tools there with A and I questioning and using some why questioning, and hopefully they didn't seem too petulant or why question. The way I tried to get past that is maybe by framing it so. Letting them answer, and then or letting Tom answer rather, sorry, and then forming the next why question using elements of what they just answered. So that was one of the ways that I managed to get past that. We then go forward to a point where we're talking about enhancing practice.
Well, so, but I mean, there's still elements I can improve on. I think it's the same for everyone.
So with that in mind, then moving on to enhancing practice. What are your take-home messages? What are you going to take away with you?
Oh, I think I keep communication, definitely. I think the things that I would improve would be obviously make sure I follow that systematic approach. Like I said, the blood pressure cuff there probably threw me a bit, but you know, I think the systematic approach thing is very important, and I've just acknowledging that. I would normally do that in my practice, and I think just now I've experienced this. I think I'm now going to be more cognizant of it, and the other thing would be just accuracy around what I'm speaking, and also just, you know, think about how I phrase things to my patients.
And when are you going to do those things?
Well, I'll probably do it in the next simulation if that's all right, just to go through it again and just make sure I hit all those things and
Excellent.
feel comfortable with that.
Anything else that you want to add, discuss?
No, great. That was really good. A really valuable experience.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well done, Tom.
Cheers.
So again, really open up to the floor. As there's probably some elements within that you may do differently, but like I said, it's not necessarily always the prescriptive way of doing it. I think there's a kind of, it's a bit of a catch-all in a lot of respects, but I think there's obviously other debriefing models out there. But I think for me, I like the structure of it, and it kind of the way we kind of get information out of it and then be able to apply that to practice, I think is really, really important.
It's really just about trying to offer structure where maybe there isn't a structure already, and to help people have better simulation, really.
So I did notice that there was a hand up earlier on. Was that Naomi? I think it was. Yeah. I don't know if there's any other questions or anybody else wants to contribute. More than welcome.
Naomi, you have the floor there.
But I don't think I had my hand up. I'm sorry if I did. It was very nice to be able to watch how other people do it, which I think quite often is, you know, something that we need to feel more comfortable with, is having a little bit of peer review and learning from facilitators to facilitator, as well as how we do it with participants. But thank you, it's very useful.
I love that. No, that's a lovely point, Naomi. Absolutely. I think it's a skill, and you know, if we're simulating, one thing that we've noticed actually is when we're running the courses for this is that we're simulating someone debriefing, you know, and so in a way the debriefer becomes the participant within a simulation, and so we won't go too far down that. But you know, I think what's happening there is that, you know, when you're debriefing someone who's just performed a debrief as a meta debrief, then, you know, and that learning can take place. It's something that we need to appreciate. You know, debriefing is a skill, and helping people understand why they're debriefing in a particular way. In the same way that it's good understanding why a clinician takes a particular decision, then it's a good thing.
We actually did an exercise, didn't we, where we did exactly the same debrief with Darren playing the part of, I don't know why naturally you fall into that camp.
The grumpy person,
you played the sort of grumpy debrief following the core debrief. And then I did a very open debrief, where we sat in a circle and spoke about it. And the difference was huge, actually.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
The way they experienced it, you know, and it's the same model. So I think it definitely comes down to the ability of the person to kind of facilitate, set the tone for it to be a warm.
And I'd probably say, forgive me, I think I'd probably say actually the personality of the person doing the debrief, regardless of the tool as well, really matters. Yeah. You know, and we should think about that more as well. You know, because when I'm pretending to be a grumpy person, the debrief's appalling, and then Tom's Mr. Nice Guy, so that's okay. Any other thoughts? Any other questions? Anything we got on the chat, or we're all good? See. While I just jibber jabber on, if you want to disturb me, you disturb me. But other than that, I think, yeah, we just wanted to introduce and share these tools with you. We're proud of them. We think they work. We don't think they're too complicated, and they're open to allow you to include variations of things that you're doing yourself, as Naomi discussed there with changing why for hows and whatnot. I think we've had some good points. I know Andy mentioned as well about using how questions, and I think the how questions are probably a bit of an insight for us as well. So that's been really useful.
Nice chat from Tracy there, saying really good to see the tool being used. Not seen the tool, but really like the structure of it. And I think actually the way I look at it is like a little bit of a handrail, you know. Yeah. So I think if you all know where the banister is, you know, it helps you navigate the stairs. It's a really bad anecdote. But it kind of it does work. I think you know whereabouts you are. Yeah. You know, and I think that's important within, you know, just setting that safe environment as we've been talking about.
So yes, we wanted to share these tools with you. We hope you find them useful. We find the conversation useful, and I think this is what we need to do more of. We need to have these discussions a bit more, share each other's ideas and thoughts as well. And ultimately, you know, for the betterment of our learners and hopefully having better sim, creating better clinicians into better jobs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think
if there's any other questions, any final questions or any points from anyone from the floor? Emma, do you want? Oh, there's one there. Oh, Naomi's last comments. Useful session.
I feel like I've just taken over the microphone. It would be completely remiss of me not to take this opportunity to just promote the Association for Simulated Practice in Healthcare, and to invite anyone that's here to maybe have a little look at what we can offer you. We are more than just a conference, but it's also, you've raised the point about networking, and it's a lovely place to network, and I know that we work very well with Laerdal as well. So sorry if I stole that moment back.
No. I think the sentiments that both Tom and I know Laerdal feel, we're right back at you. So no, absolutely. It's more than just a conference, like Naomi said. It's an amazing resource for us all to use, share, and like I said, create better sim.
I've got a couple of chat ones here.
Gonna go for that.
So I've got Rachel. Thanks. Useful to hear more about this topic, as well as hearing the audience participation thoughts. Thank you. Susanna, really interesting, extremely helpful models and discussions. Great to see in use. Thanks to you both.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. It's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.